Chapter 2: Overcoming Generational Fears and Traumas. Generational fears and traumas, often referred to as intergenerational or transgenerational trauma, are psychological, emotional, and behavioral patterns passed down through families and societies. These fears and traumas can stem from historical events, cultural shifts, family experiences, and societal conditioning. Below are some of the main types of traumas. 1. Historical and cultural trauma. This type of trauma is rooted in large-scale historical events that affect entire communities, such as slavery and colonialism, trauma from oppression, forced labor, and cultural erasure. War and genocide, survivors and descendants of wars, example Holocaust survivors, Rwandan genocide. Forced displacement, refugees and indigenous populations experiencing forced removal. 2. Family and relationship trauma. This type stems from dysfunctional family dynamics and gets passed down through parenting styles. Abuse and neglect, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse that shapes attachment issues. Abandonment and rejection, emotional unavailability or absent parents affecting self-worth. Divorce and family breakdowns, creating instability and fear of relationships. 3. Financial and economic trauma. Fear of financial insecurity due to past hardships, such as Great Depression mindset, scarcity thinking passed down by ancestors who experienced economic crashes. Immigrant struggles, fear of losing financial stability after migration. Bankruptcy and business failures, creating a fear of taking risks in future generations. 4. Workplace and success trauma. Anxiety about career choices due to past failures or societal expectations. Pressure to succeed, families who push unrealistic expectations for achievement. Fear of failure, trauma from past generations losing jobs or failing in business. Toxic work culture, fear of authority, burnout, or exploitation due to past experiences. Breaking generational fear and trauma. Healing requires self-awareness, therapy, and breaking toxic cycles. Key steps include recognizing the patterns, identifying inherited fears. Therapy and healing work, seeking professional guidance. Challenging beliefs, reframing mindsets and limiting beliefs. Creating new traditions, building healthier habits for future generations. 1. Historical and cultural trauma. Traumas from slavery and colonialism. Slavery and colonialism left deep scars that still affect generations today. Here are 5 major traumas caused by this history, along with powerful stories of resilience and healing. 1. Identity and cultural trauma. The struggle, loss of native languages, traditions, and self-worth due to cultural erasure. Story: The Forgotten Name. A young woman named Amina, born in the U.S., always felt disconnected from her African roots. Her family had been stripped of their original language and traditions due to slavery. In school, she was mocked for her dark skin and felt pressured to act more American. One day, Amina met an elder at a cultural event who asked her, "Do you know the meaning of your name?" She didn't. The elder explained that Amina was the name of a great African queen, a warrior leader from Nigeria. This sparked a journey of self-discovery. How she overcame it. She started learning her ancestral language, Yoruba. She connected with African cultural groups. She wrote a book about the power of reclaiming lost identities. 2. Psychological and emotional trauma. The struggle, generational fear, anxiety, and trauma responses due to past oppression. Story: The Fear That Lingers. Malik, a black father, found himself always warning his son to never argue with police or not wear a hoodie at night. He didn't realize how much fear he was passing down until his son asked, "Dad, why do you think something bad will always happen?" Malik thought about the stories his grandfather told him, how his ancestors were lynched for minor offenses, how his father was beaten during protests, and how his uncle was falsely imprisoned. It was clear, his family had been living in survival mode for generations. How he overcame it. He started therapy and joined a racial healing group. He worked on replacing fear-based lessons with empowerment. He taught his son confidence, not just caution. 3. Economic and financial trauma. The struggle, lack of generational wealth due to systemic oppression. Story, from poverty to power. Rosa, the granddaughter of sharecroppers, always heard her family say, "We will never be rich. The system is against us." She inherited their fear of financial risk and stayed in low-paying jobs because security seemed safer than chasing wealth. One day, she attended a financial literacy workshop. She learned how slavery and segregation had blocked black families from land ownership and banking opportunities. But she also learned how some families overcame these barriers through entrepreneurship. Inspired, she started a side business selling homemade beauty products. How she overcame it. She educated herself on investments and business ownership. She bought her first rental property and built generational wealth. She taught financial literacy in her community. 4. Familial and generational trauma. The struggle, broken family structures and harsh parenting styles passed down. Story, healing the mother-daughter bond. Jasmine grew up in a strict household where emotions were seen as a weakness. Her mother, Miss Thelma, often said, "We don't have time for feelings, life is hard." It wasn't until Jasmine had her daughter that she realized how distant she felt from her mom. Digging into her family's past, she learned that Miss Thelma's grandmother had been forced to give up her children during slavery. Her mother was raised in an orphanage, learning to survive, not love. Jasmine decided to break the cycle. How she overcame it. She had deep conversations with her mother about their family's past. She chose a different parenting style full of warmth and open emotions. She encouraged therapy and generational healing. 5. Social and systemic trauma. The struggle, racial discrimination, police brutality, and being treated as a second-class citizen. Story, the lawyer who fought back. Growing up, Jamal always heard his grandfather talk about Jim Crow laws and segregation. Even though those laws had ended, Jamal still faced discrimination, being pulled over often, denied job opportunities, and labeled as aggressive when speaking up. Instead of accepting this as fate, he decided to become a civil rights lawyer. In his first big case, he defended a black business owner who was unfairly denied a bank loan. After winning, he realized, systemic trauma doesn't have to be permanent, change is possible. How he overcame it. He studied law and worked for justice reform. He mentored young black students about their rights. He advocated for police accountability and fair policies. Final thought. Slavery and colonialism caused deep wounds, but healing is possible. Each of these stories shows that through knowledge, self-awareness, and action, we can break cycles of trauma and reclaim power. Which story resonates with you the most? Traumas from war and genocide. War and genocide leave lasting scars on survivors and their descendants, affecting mental health, family structures, economic stability, and even cultural identity. Here are 5 major types of traumas caused by war and genocide, along with inspiring stories of resilience and healing. 1. Psychological and PTSD trauma. The struggle, nightmares, anxiety, hypervigilance, and an inability to feel safe due to past violence. Story, the soldier who couldn't sleep. Ahmed, a former soldier, had survived the Syrian war. He relocated to Europe, but the war never truly left him. The sound of fireworks made him drop to the ground, his body reacting as if he were back in battle. Every night, he had nightmares of gunfire and explosions. One day, his daughter found him trembling in a corner. She said, "Baba, you're home now. The war is gone." But Ahmed realized his mind was still trapped in it. How he overcame it. He sought therapy specialized in PTSD, cognitive behavioral therapy, and EMDR. He joined a veterans support group to talk about his experiences. He started meditation and art therapy, using painting to express his pain. 2. Familial and generational trauma. The struggle, families broken apart, children growing up in fear, and generational cycles of trauma. Story, the grandmother who hid her pain. Hannah, a Holocaust survivor, rarely spoke about her past. Her grandchildren only knew bits and pieces, whispers about the camps and why she never ate all her food at once. One day, her granddaughter Rachel asked, "Grandma, why do you always save scraps of food?" Hannah finally broke down and revealed the truth: she had survived Auschwitz by hiding bread in her pockets, a habit she couldn't shake. How she overcame it. She wrote down her story for future generations to understand. She worked with a trauma therapist to process her past. She started speaking at schools, ensuring history was never forgotten. 3. Economic and displacement trauma. The struggle, refugees losing homes, jobs, and economic security, leading to long-term financial struggles. Story, the businessman who lost everything. Bakery was a successful shop owner in Rwanda before the 1994 genocide. When violence erupted, he lost his home, his shop was burned down, and he had to flee with nothing but his family and a bag of clothes. He arrived in Uganda as a refugee with no money, no connections, and no way to start over. But he refused to give up. How he overcame it. He took small jobs to save money and eventually started selling goods at a market. He joined a microloan program that helped refugees start businesses. Years later, he opened a store again and helped other refugees rebuild their lives. 4. Cultural and identity trauma. The struggle, forced assimilation, loss of language and traditions, and shame about one's cultural heritage. Story, the girl who didn't know her name. Maria was born in Argentina to Armenian parents who had survived the Armenian genocide. But her family never spoke Armenian. They wanted to blend in and avoid trouble. One day, Maria found an old letter from her great-grandmother written in a language she couldn't read. When she asked about it, her mother sighed, "That was Armenian, but we don't speak it anymore." Maria felt a deep loss. How could she reclaim a heritage that had been erased? How she overcame it. She started taking Armenian language classes. She researched her family history and visited Armenia. She created a cultural blog to teach others about her lost heritage. 5. Social and systemic trauma. The struggle, racism, persecution, and being treated as a second-class citizen due to one's history. Story, the boy who was always a stranger. Tenzin was a Tibetan refugee born in India. Though he had never seen Tibet, he was always reminded that he was not truly home. When he applied for jobs, people questioned his accent. When he went to school, others mocked his traditional clothes. One day, he asked his father, "Why do they treat us like we don't belong?" His father sighed, "Because they don't know our story." How he overcame it. He became an activist, sharing Tibetan refugee stories in schools and online. He learned about his culture and taught others through social media. He founded a community center to support other displaced Tibetans. Traumas from forced displacement. Forced displacement, whether due to war, persecution, natural disasters, or economic crises, leaves lasting scars on individuals, families, and entire communities. Here are 5 major types of traumas caused by forced displacement, real-world examples, and powerful stories of resilience and healing. 1. Psychological and PTSD trauma. The struggle, anxiety, depression, survivor's guilt, and PTSD caused by the chaos of displacement. Real example, Syrian refugees, 2011 present, millions of Syrians have fled civil war, many suffering from PTSD due to bombings, violence, and losing loved ones. Story, the boy who couldn't speak. Omar, a 9-year-old Syrian boy, used to love playing soccer with his friends. But after his family's house was bombed and they escaped to Turkey, he stopped speaking. Whenever he heard loud noises, he would hide under the bed. His parents were desperate. He was physically safe but emotionally trapped in the past. One day, at a refugee camp, a therapist introduced him to art therapy. At first, he refused to draw. But slowly, he started sketching images of his lost home, his old school, and finally, himself playing soccer again. Over time, Omar began speaking again, sharing his fears through art. How he overcame it. He received trauma therapy, especially art therapy. His family created a safe and stable environment for him. He joined a local soccer team, rebuilding confidence and friendships. 2. Familial and generational trauma. The struggle, families being separated, children growing up in trauma, and generational cycles of instability. Real example, the Lost Boys of Sudan, 1980s to 90s, thousands of Sudanese children were orphaned or separated from their families due to civil war, growing up in refugee camps. Story, the brothers who found each other again. Peter and James were just kids when war broke out in South Sudan. Their village was attacked, and in the chaos, they were separated. Peter ran east, James ran west. For years, neither knew if the other was alive. Peter ended up in a refugee camp in Kenya. He worked hard, got an education, and eventually moved to the US. But he never stopped searching for his brother. One day, through an aid organization, he got a call. James was alive in another camp. They reunited after 14 years apart. How they overcame it. They built a support system through refugee networks. They shared their story, raising awareness for displaced families. They helped other separated refugees reconnect through social media and NGOs. 3. Economic and financial trauma. The struggle, losing homes, jobs, and savings, having to start from zero. Real example, Venezuelan migrants, 2015 present, economic collapse forced millions to flee, many losing everything and struggling to rebuild. Story, the engineer who became a street vendor. Sofia was a successful civil engineer in Venezuela. But as the economy collapsed, her salary became worthless. Food was scarce, crime was rising, and one day, she made a painful choice, to leave everything behind. She fled to Colombia, but her degree wasn't recognized. With no money or job, she started selling arepas, Venezuelan corn cakes, on the streets. It was humiliating at first. She had built bridges, and now she was struggling to afford food. But she refused to give up. Over time, she saved money, took online courses, and got certified as an engineer again. 3 years later, she was working in construction, helping build housing for fellow refugees. How she overcame it. She adapted by learning new skills and certifications. She built financial stability by taking small jobs first. She helped others by using her skills in a new country. 4. Cultural and identity trauma. The struggle, losing language, traditions, and a sense of belonging in a new country. Real example, the Rohingya crisis, 2017 present, the Rohingya people fled ethnic persecution in Myanmar, struggling to maintain their identity in refugee camps. Story, the girl who forgot her language. Aisha was 6 when her family fled Myanmar for Bangladesh. At the refugee camp, she grew up speaking Bengali instead of Rohingya. By the time she was 14, she could barely understand her grandparents' stories. They spoke Rohingya, and she had forgotten. One day, her grandmother took her hands and said, "If you lose your language, you lose us." That moment hit her hard. She decided to relearn Rohingya, collecting old folk stories and writing them down. Years later, Aisha became a teacher, helping young Rohingya children learn their language and traditions so they wouldn't be lost forever. How she overcame it. She made an effort to relearn and preserve her language. She shared cultural traditions with younger generations. She used education to empower her community. 5. Social and systemic trauma. The struggle, facing discrimination, legal struggles, and exclusion in a new country. Real example, the Palestinian displacement, 1948 present. Many Palestinians have lived stateless for generations, struggling for rights and recognition. Story, the doctor who wasn't recognized. Omar, a Palestinian refugee, had studied medicine for years. But when he fled to Lebanon, his credentials weren't accepted. Without legal status, he wasn't allowed to work in hospitals. Instead, he lived in a refugee camp, treating sick people for free. Frustrated but determined, he joined an organization advocating for refugee work rights. After years of activism, Lebanon passed a law allowing Palestinian doctors to work legally. Omar finally got his medical license and helped thousands of displaced families get health care. How he overcame it. He fought for legal recognition and work rights. He used his skills to help others, even when unpaid. He turned his struggle into a movement for change. Final thought. Forced displacement steals homes, jobs, and a sense of security, but it doesn't have to steal hope. Each of these real stories shows that through resilience, education, and community support, displaced people can rebuild their lives. Which story moved you the most? 2. Family and relationship traumas. This type stems from dysfunctional family dynamics and gets passed down through parenting styles. Abuse and neglect, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse that shapes attachment issues. Abandonment and rejection, emotional unavailability or absent parents affecting self-worth. Divorce and family breakdowns, creating instability and fear of relationships. Traumas from abuse and neglect. Abuse and neglect cause deep, long-lasting trauma that affects mental health, relationships, and self-worth. Here are 5 major types of traumas caused by abuse and neglect, along with real-life examples and inspiring stories of survival and healing. 1. Psychological and PTSD trauma. The struggle, anxiety, depression, flashbacks, nightmares, and self-destructive behavior due to past abuse. Real example, Oprah Winfrey. As a child, she endured physical and sexual abuse, leading to deep trauma. Story, the girl who thought it was her fault. Lisa grew up in a home where she was physically and emotionally abused. Every time her father hit her, he told her, "You made me do this." She believed him. Even after escaping at 17, the trauma stayed. She felt unworthy of love, and every loud voice made her flinch. One day, a friend convinced her to see a therapist. Lisa learned that abuse was never her fault. Through therapy, she began to rewrite the story she had been told. Years later, she became a counselor, helping other survivors reclaim their lives. How she overcame it. She sought trauma therapy, CBT and EMDR. She built a support system of friends and mentors. She used her experience to help others heal. 2. Attachment and relationship trauma. The struggle, difficulty trusting people, fear of abandonment, or toxic relationship patterns due to early neglect. Real example, Marilyn Monroe. She grew up in foster care, experiencing neglect that led to lifelong struggles with relationships and self-worth. Story, the man who pushed everyone away. David had been in and out of foster homes as a child. Every time he got close to someone, they left. As an adult, he struggled in relationships. He either clung too tightly or pushed people away before they could hurt him. After a painful breakup, he started therapy and learned about attachment trauma. Slowly, he began to recognize his fears and rebuild trust. He joined a support group for former foster youth, where he finally felt safe to be vulnerable. How he overcame it. He worked with a therapist to heal attachment wounds. He learned to communicate openly in relationships. He built healthy friendships before seeking romance. 3. Emotional and self-worth trauma. The struggle, feeling unworthy, struggling with self-hatred, or perfectionism due to emotional abuse. Real example, Demi Lovato. They battled self-esteem issues and addiction after childhood emotional struggles. Story, the girl who never felt good enough. Samantha grew up with a mother who constantly criticized her. "You'll never be smart enough. You're too fat to be loved." Every word chipped away at her confidence. By her teens, she had an eating disorder and severe anxiety. One day, a teacher pulled her aside and said, "You are more than what your mother says." That moment sparked something in her. She started writing down positive affirmations, went to therapy, and cut toxic people from her life. Years later, Samantha became a motivational speaker, teaching others how to rewrite the negative voices in their heads. How she overcame it. She practiced positive affirmations and self-compassion. She sought therapy to undo negative beliefs. She surrounded herself with supportive, encouraging people. 4. Physical and sexual trauma. The struggle, body shame, trust issues, and dissociation due to physical or sexual abuse. Real example, Gabrielle Union. She survived sexual assault and later became an advocate for survivors. Story, the woman who took back her power. Maria was sexually assaulted by a family friend at 14. She kept it a secret, afraid no one would believe her. For years, she felt ashamed and disconnected from her own body. At 25, she finally confided in a close friend, who encouraged her to see a therapist. For the first time, she heard the words, "It wasn't your fault." She later joined a support group and began kickboxing as a way to reclaim her strength. Now, Maria runs self-defense workshops for other survivors, teaching them that they are not victims, but warriors. How she overcame it. She sought professional trauma therapy. She found healing through movement and self-defense. She built a community of fellow survivors. 5. Social and generational trauma. The struggle, cycles of abuse passed down through families and communities. Real example, Tyler Perry. He grew up with an abusive father but broke the cycle by choosing to heal. Story, the father who chose to change. Michael grew up in a violent household. His father hit him, just as his grandfather had hit his father. By the time he became a father himself, he realized he was on the verge of repeating the same cycle. One night, after yelling at his son, he saw the fear in his child's eyes, the same fear he had felt as a boy. He broke down. That night, he promised himself, "The cycle ends with me." He started therapy, joined a support group, and learned healthy parenting techniques. Years later, his son said, "Dad, I always felt safe with you." That was the moment he knew he had truly healed. How he overcame it. He sought therapy to unlearn toxic behaviors. He joined parenting classes and learned positive discipline. He shared his story to inspire others to break the cycle. Final thought. Abuse and neglect leave deep scars, but healing is possible. These real-life stories show that with therapy, self-awareness, and support, survivors can rewrite their own stories. Which story resonated with you the most? Traumas from abandonment and rejection. Abandonment and rejection leave deep emotional wounds that can shape a person's self-worth, relationships, and mental health. Whether it's being left by a parent, rejected by society, or feeling unseen by those we love, these experiences create long-term trauma. Below are 5 types of traumas caused by abandonment and rejection, along with real-life examples and inspiring stories of resilience and healing. 1. Emotional and self-worth trauma. The struggle, feeling unworthy, unloved, or constantly seeking validation due to early rejection. Real example, Marilyn Monroe. Her mother abandoned her as a child, leaving her in foster homes. She spent her life struggling with feelings of being unwanted. Story, the girl who never felt enough. Jessica was 5 when her mother left her at a relative's house and never returned. She spent years wondering what she did wrong. As she grew older, she became a people pleaser, afraid that if she didn't make others happy, they'd leave too. In her 20s, after a series of failed relationships, Jessica realized she was chasing love from people who didn't value her. Through therapy and self-love practices, she started seeing her own worth. She eventually became a mentor for foster children, showing them that they were never the problem, it was the ones who left. How she overcame it. She practiced self-love and daily affirmations. She built a support system of people who valued her. She worked through abandonment trauma in therapy. 2. Relationship and attachment trauma. The struggle, fear of intimacy, trust issues, or clinging to unhealthy relationships due to past rejection. Real example, Princess Diana. She experienced rejection from her family and later struggled with self-worth in her marriage. Story, the man who couldn't trust love. Aaron was abandoned by his father at 6. Every time someone got close to him, friends, partners, he expected them to leave. In relationships, he either pushed people away first or became so clingy that they felt smothered. One day, after another breakup, Aaron finally asked himself, "Why do I keep repeating this pattern?" With therapy, he learned about attachment styles and started healing. Instead of running from love, he slowly let himself be vulnerable. Years later, he found a stable, loving relationship, one where he no longer feared rejection. How he overcame it. He learned about attachment trauma and therapy. He practiced vulnerability and built trust gradually. He surrounded himself with stable, supportive relationships. 3. Social and peer rejection trauma. The struggle, feeling like an outsider, bullied, or excluded by peers, leading to isolation and social anxiety. Real example, Albert Einstein as a child, he was rejected by peers and teachers for being different. Story, the boy who was always picked last. Daniel was bullied in school for being different. No one wanted to sit with him at lunch, and he was always picked last in sports. Over time, he withdrew completely, developing social anxiety.
Men's Forum wants you to master men's blueprint for life. Learn how to build wealth, build quality relationships with the right people, lead a better and healthier family life, live your full potential, inspire the world. Men were born to lead, keep, and protect the family. Join Men's Forum and master your blueprint for life. Men's Forum, all you need to become a better man.
At 17, he discovered a coding club, a place where other kids who felt like outsiders found belonging. As he connected with like-minded people, he realized, I wasn't the problem. I just needed to find my people. Years later, he became a software engineer and started a program for young kids who feel isolated, giving them a space to connect. How he overcame it. He found a community where he was valued. He worked on his social anxiety with therapy. He used his experiences to help others find belonging. Parental abandonment trauma. The struggle, growing up without a parent, leading to deep emotional wounds and difficulty in relationships. Real example, Steve Jobs. He was given up for adoption, which affected his self-worth and relationships. Story, the boy who always asked why. Asterisk. Marcus was abandoned by his father before he was born. Growing up, he watched other kids play with their dads and always asked his mother, why didn't he want me? As a teenager, he struggled with anger and self-doubt. But one day, he met a coach who told him, your father leaving had nothing to do with your worth, it had to do with his own struggles. That moment changed everything. Marcus stopped defining himself by his father's absence. He worked hard, earned a scholarship, and later became a mentor for kids without fathers, helping them see that they were never unworthy of love. How he overcame it. He redefined his self-worth outside of his father's absence. He found strong male role models in coaches and mentors. He turned his pain into purpose by mentoring others. 5. Career and professional rejection trauma. The struggle, fear of failure, imposter syndrome, or giving up too soon due to past rejection. Real example, J.K. Rowling. She was rejected by 12 publishers before finally succeeding with Harry Potter. Story, the woman who almost quit too soon. Lena dreamed of being an artist. She applied to 10 art schools and got rejected by all of them. Heartbroken, she almost gave up. But then, she met an older artist who told her, rejection is part of success. Instead of quitting, she started sharing her work online. Slowly, people noticed. Years later, her paintings were featured in a gallery. Looking back, she realized, if I had given up, I would never have found my audience. How she overcame it. She redefined rejection as part of the process. She found alternative ways to showcase her talent. She built resilience and refused to give up. Final thought. Rejection and abandonment can shape us, but they don't have to define us. These real stories prove that with self-awareness, support, and resilience, healing is possible. Which story resonated with you the most? Traumas from divorce and family breakdowns. Divorce and family breakdowns can leave deep emotional scars, especially for children. The loss of stability, feelings of rejection, and sudden changes in family dynamics can impact self-worth, relationships, and mental health. Here are 5 major types of traumas caused by divorce and family breakdowns, along with real-life examples and inspiring stories of resilience and healing. 1. Abandonment and rejection trauma. The struggle, feeling unwanted or unworthy when a parent leaves or starts a new family. Real example, Adele. Her father left when she was young, leading to deep feelings of abandonment that she later expressed in her music. Story, the boy who thought he wasn't enough. Jordan was 8 when his father left and started a new family. His father rarely called, and when he did, it felt forced. Jordan thought, why wasn't I enough for him to stay? As he grew older, this belief followed him. He sabotaged relationships, afraid people would leave like his dad did. Finally, in therapy, he learned to separate his worth from his father's actions. He realized that his father's absence wasn't about him, it was about his father's own struggles. Jordan later became a mentor for kids growing up without a father, helping them understand that they are enough, no matter who leaves. How he overcame it. He worked through abandonment trauma in therapy. He built strong, healthy relationships with people who stayed. He mentored others, turning his pain into purpose. 2. Trust and relationship trauma. The struggle, difficulty trusting others, commitment issues, or fear of relationships due to seeing a marriage fall apart. Real example, Halle Berry. After witnessing domestic violence in her childhood home, she struggled with trust and relationships for years. Story, the girl who thought love was temporary. Sophia grew up watching her parents argue until one day, her father packed his bags and never returned. She told herself, love never lasts. As an adult, she avoided serious relationships, fearing they would end in heartbreak. After years of running, she finally confronted her past with the help of a therapist. She learned that while her parents' love ended, it didn't mean all love would. With time, she opened up to healthy relationships and realized that trust is built, not given. How she overcame it. She worked on her trust issues in therapy. She built relationships gradually, allowing trust to develop. She replaced negative beliefs about love with healthier ones. 3. Identity and self-worth trauma. The struggle, feeling like a burden, struggling with self-identity, or blaming oneself for the divorce. Real example, Demi Lovato. They struggled with self-worth issues due to family instability and divorce. Story, the boy who blamed himself. Ethan was 6 when his parents divorced. He overheard his mother say, "If we hadn't had Ethan so young, maybe things would have been different." That sentence stuck with him for years. As he grew older, he struggled with self-worth, believing he was the reason his parents' marriage ended. It wasn't until college that he finally talked to a counselor, who helped him understand that the divorce had nothing to do with him. Ethan later became a teacher, helping kids from broken homes see that they are never to blame for adult choices. How he overcame it. He challenged the negative beliefs he had about himself. He surrounded himself with people who valued him. He became a mentor to others facing similar struggles. 4. Emotional and mental health trauma. The struggle, anxiety, depression, or emotional instability due to family conflict. Real example, Angelina Jolie. Her parents' divorce deeply affected her mental health, leading to struggles with depression and self-harm. Story, the girl who stopped believing in happiness. Maya was 10 when her parents divorced. She saw her mother cry every night and learned to hide her own feelings to stay strong. By her teens, she struggled with depression but refused to ask for help. At 18, she finally broke down. A friend encouraged her to seek therapy, where she learned that her emotions were valid and that suppressing them only made things worse. She started journaling, expressing her feelings through poetry, and eventually became a writer. Maya's first book was about healing from divorce, helping others find the words she had once buried inside. How she overcame it. She acknowledged her emotions instead of suppressing them. She found healthy outlets for her pain, writing, therapy. She used her experience to help others heal. 5. Financial and stability trauma. The struggle, losing financial security, moving frequently, or struggling to feel safe after a family breakdown. Real example, Jim Carrey. After his parents divorced, his family faced extreme poverty, forcing him to work hard for success. Story, the boy who kept moving. Lucas had a stable life until his parents divorced. Suddenly, his mother couldn't afford rent, and they moved from house to house, sometimes staying with relatives. He hated feeling like a burden and stopped asking for things he needed. At 16, he got a job to help his mother. But over time, he realized that he was living in survival mode, never allowing himself to relax or dream big. A mentor at work encouraged him to believe in his future, not just his survival. Lucas went on to build a successful business, determined to create the stability he never had. How he overcame it. He learned financial independence and budgeting. He allowed himself to dream beyond survival. He became a mentor, helping others break the cycle of poverty. Final thought. Divorce and family breakdowns can leave emotional wounds, but they don't have to define you. Healing takes time, but with self-awareness, support, and resilience, it's possible to rewrite your story. Which story resonated with you the most? 3. Financial and economic trauma. Fear of financial insecurity due to past hardships, such as Great Depression mindset, scarcity thinking passed down by ancestors who experienced economic crashes. Immigrant struggles, fear of losing financial stability after migration. Bankruptcy and business failures, creating a fear of taking risks in future generations. Traumas from the Great Depression mindset. The Great Depression mindset refers to the long-lasting psychological effects of extreme poverty, economic instability, and financial trauma. It doesn't just impact those who lived through the Great Depression, it affects future generations through learned behaviors, scarcity thinking, and fear of financial insecurity. Below are 5 major types of traumas caused by this mindset, real-life examples, and inspiring stories of resilience and healing. 1. Scarcity and fear-based thinking. The struggle, fear of spending money, hoarding resources, and constantly worrying about financial security, even when stable. Real example, Warren Buffett's frugality. Despite being one of the richest men in the world, he still lives in the same modest house he bought in 1958 and avoids excessive spending, a behavior rooted in Depression-era thinking. Story, the woman who saved every penny. Margaret, a child of Great Depression survivors, grew up watching her parents reuse everything from aluminum foil to old clothes. They always told her, "You never know when the money will run out." As an adult, even when she was financially stable, she never allowed herself to enjoy her earnings. She avoided vacations, kept driving an old, broken-down car, and felt guilty about any non-essential purchase. It wasn't until a financial coach helped her see that money is a tool, not a trap, that she slowly learned to balance saving with living. She started setting aside, guilt-free spending money, and realized that financial security isn't just about saving, it's about knowing how to use money wisely. How she overcame it. She set financial boundaries, save, but also enjoy life. She practiced mindful spending instead of fear-based hoarding. She worked with a financial therapist to change her money mindset. 2. Overworking and productivity trauma. The struggle, believing that rest is a luxury, feeling guilty when not working, and tying self-worth to productivity. Real example, Elon Musk. His extreme work habits, sometimes working 100-hour weeks, reflect a fear of financial failure, common in people with Depression-era thinking. Story, the man who couldn't stop working. James grew up in a family where his grandfather constantly reminded him, "Idle hands are the devil's workshop." His father, who lived through tough economic times, worked multiple jobs and never took a day off. James inherited this mindset. Even after building a successful business, he felt guilty taking breaks. He worked 14-hour days, skipping vacations, afraid that if he stopped, everything would collapse. One day, he suffered a stress-induced heart attack. This wake-up call forced him to re-evaluate. He started delegating work, taking small breaks, and realized that success wasn't about working non-stop, it was about working smart. How he overcame it. He set work-life balance boundaries. He replaced guilt with the belief that rest fuels productivity. He delegated responsibilities and trusted his team. 3. Fear of taking risks. The struggle, avoiding new opportunities, fearing financial loss, and sticking to safe but unfulfilling jobs. Real example, the silent generation, born during/after the Great Depression, they are known for their conservative financial decisions and reluctance to take risks. Story, the man who never followed his dream. Robert was an incredibly talented artist, but his Depression-era parents always told him, "Art won't pay the bills. Get a safe job." So, he became an accountant, a job he hated but one that offered stability. For years, he repressed his dream. But at 50, after being laid off, he finally took a risk. He opened a small art studio. Within a year, He was making more money doing what he loved than he ever had at his accounting job. He realized that playing it safe can sometimes be the biggest risk of all. How he overcame it. He identified the fear-driven beliefs holding him back. He took small steps toward his dream, not reckless risks. He redefined security, not just financial, but personal fulfillment. 4. Emotional suppression and mental health neglect. The struggle, avoiding emotions, dismissing therapy, and believing that mental health struggles are a sign of weakness. Real example, many Depression-era survivors, they often refused to acknowledge mental health issues, seeing them as a luxury problem. Story, the woman who never cried. Linda's parents had a simple rule: toughen up. Crying doesn't solve problems. Her father, raised during the Great Depression, believed therapy was for weak people. So, when Linda struggled with anxiety and depression, she kept it to herself. She buried her emotions in work and avoided talking about her pain. But after a close friend took their own life, she realized the cost of emotional suppression. She finally started therapy and learned that healing wasn't weakness, it was strength. She later became a mental health advocate, encouraging others to seek help. How she overcame it. She redefined mental health as strength, not weakness. She sought therapy and emotional support. She encouraged open conversations about mental well-being. 5. Financial guilt and generational burden. The struggle, feeling guilty for financial success, carrying family financial burdens, and self-sabotaging wealth. Real example, Oprah Winfrey. She struggled with guilt over her success, knowing her family grew up in extreme poverty. Story, the boy who felt guilty for succeeding. Carlos grew up poor, with parents who constantly struggled to make ends meet. When he got a scholarship and later built a successful career, he felt guilty. How could he enjoy his wealth when his family still struggled? He started giving away all his money to help his relatives, leaving himself financially unstable. A mentor finally told him, "You can't pour from an empty cup. Build wealth first, then help others sustainably." Carlos learned to set financial boundaries, investing wisely while still supporting his family in a way that didn't drain him. How he overcame it. He learned to help others without sacrificing his own stability. He built generational wealth instead of short-term handouts. He shifted his mindset from guilt to gratitude. Final thought. The Great Depression mindset can pass down fears and limitations, but it doesn't have to control you. These real stories prove that with self-awareness, mindset shifts, and strategic action, healing and financial freedom are possible. Which story resonated with you the most? Traumas from immigrant struggles. Immigrants often face significant psychological and emotional struggles as they adapt to a new country. The trauma can stem from financial hardships, cultural identity crises, discrimination, and the pain of leaving loved ones behind. These struggles don't just affect first-generation immigrants but can also pass down to their children. Here are 5 types of traumas caused by immigrant struggles, real-life examples and inspiring stories of resilience and healing. 1. Identity and cultural displacement trauma. The struggle, feeling lost between two cultures, struggling to belong, and experiencing identity confusion. Real example, Trevor Noah is a mixed-race child born during apartheid in South Africa. He struggled with identity and acceptance when moving to new environments. Story, the girl who didn't belong anywhere. Meena was 6 when her family moved from India to Canada. At school, she was teased for her accent, and at home, her parents expected her to follow strict Indian traditions. She felt like she didn't fully belong anywhere, too Indian for her Canadian classmates, too Canadian for her Indian relatives. For years, she tried to erase her cultural roots, refusing to speak her native language and avoiding Indian food in public. But in college, she joined a multicultural student group and met other immigrants with similar experiences. She learned that she didn't have to choose one culture over the other, she could be both. How she overcame it. She embraced both cultures instead of rejecting one. She connected with others who had similar experiences. She practiced self-acceptance, realizing her identity was unique and valuable. 2. Family separation and abandonment trauma. The struggle, the pain of leaving family behind or growing up without parents who immigrated first. Real example, Jose Antonio Vargas, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who was sent from the Philippines to the US as a child, growing up without his mother. Story, the boy who waited for his mother. Carlos was 4 when his mother left El Salvador to work in the US. She promised to bring him over soon, but years passed. He grew up with his grandmother, watching other kids with their parents and wondering why his mother left. At 15, he finally reunited with her, but by then, she felt like a stranger. He was angry and distant, struggling to rebuild their relationship. Over time, through open conversations and therapy, Carlos realized that his mother's absence wasn't abandonment, it was sacrifice. She had left to give him a better future. How he overcame it. He expressed his emotions openly instead of suppressing them. He sought therapy to process his feelings of abandonment. He redefined his relationship with his mother, focusing on the present instead of the past. 3. Financial hardship and generational pressure. The struggle, living in poverty, working multiple low-paying jobs, and feeling pressured to succeed for the entire family. Real example, Arnold Schwarzenegger. His immigrant journey from Austria to the US was filled with financial struggles before he became a Hollywood star and politician. Story, the boy who carried his family's hopes. Javier's parents worked 12-hour shifts cleaning offices, barely making enough to survive. As the oldest son, he felt responsible for lifting the entire family out of poverty. His parents constantly reminded him, "We sacrificed everything for you, don't waste it." He worked 2 jobs while attending college, feeling like failure wasn't an option. But the pressure became overwhelming. He suffered from anxiety and burnout. A mentor finally helped him see that success isn't just financial, it's also about mental well-being. Javier found balance by setting realistic goals, practicing self-care, and reminding himself that he wasn't alone in carrying the burden. How he overcame it. He sought financial aid and scholarships to ease the burden. He redefined success beyond just making money. He set boundaries between his own dreams and family expectations. 4. Discrimination and social exclusion trauma. The struggle, facing racism, xenophobia, and being treated as an outsider in a new country. Real example, Malala Yousafzai. As a refugee and activist, she faced discrimination but continued advocating for education rights. Story, the woman who hid her accent. Aisha moved from Syria to the UK after war displaced her family. She was a brilliant engineer, but every time she spoke, people looked at her differently. She overheard co-workers mocking her accent, and job interviews often ended with, "We're looking for someone who fits our company culture better." She started avoiding speaking in public and minimized her identity to blend in. But after joining a support group for immigrant women, she gained confidence. She learned that her voice mattered, and instead of hiding it, she used it to advocate for diversity in STEM fields. How she overcame it. She found a community that empowered her. She reframed her accent as a sign of resilience, not weakness. She became an advocate for inclusivity in her workplace. 5. Mental health struggles and emotional suppression. The struggle, immigrant families often dismiss mental health issues, seeing them as a luxury problem compared to survival needs. Real example, Hassan Minhaj, the comedian, has spoken about the emotional repression in many immigrant households and the stigma around mental health. Story, the boy who wasn't allowed to feel. Lee's Chinese parents believed in tough love. When he was bullied at school, they told him, "You must be strong." We went through worse. When he felt anxious, they said, "Focus on your studies. Feelings won't feed you." He learned to suppress his emotions, but the stress built up. As an adult, he struggled with panic attacks and didn't know how to ask for help. Eventually, through reading self-help books and attending therapy in secret, he realized that mental health isn't weakness, it's strength. Today, he teaches emotional resilience to children of immigrants, helping them break the cycle of silence. How he overcame it. He acknowledged that his feelings were valid. He sought therapy despite cultural stigma. He became a mental health advocate for his community. Final thought. Immigrant struggles can cause deep emotional wounds, but they don't have to define you. With self-awareness, healing, and community support, it's possible to turn pain into power. Which story resonated with you the most? Bankruptcy and business failures. Trauma from bankruptcy and business failures. Failing in business or going bankrupt can be devastating, not just financially but also emotionally and mentally. Entrepreneurs often experience feelings of shame, anxiety, fear, and even identity loss when their businesses collapse. However, history has shown that failure is often the path to future success if you learn how to recover from it. Here are 5 types of traumas caused by business failures, along with real-life examples and inspiring stories of resilience and recovery. 1. Financial trauma and fear of risk-taking. The struggle. After a bankruptcy or major loss, many entrepreneurs develop a deep fear of taking risks, leading to extreme caution or even avoidance of future opportunities. Real example, Henry Ford. Before founding Ford Motor Company, his first business, Detroit Automobile Company, failed, leaving him nearly broke. However, he took another chance and built one of the most successful car companies in history. Story, the entrepreneur who never tried again. David started a tech startup with high hopes, but after 2 years of struggling, he ran out of funds and had to shut it down. His debts piled up, and the embarrassment of failure made him vow never to start a business again. For years, he stayed in a comfortable but unfulfilling corporate job, avoiding any risks. But one day, he met a mentor who told him, "Your failure wasn't the end, it was the lesson." Inspired, David analyzed what went wrong, started small, and eventually built a new, more successful business, this time with smarter financial planning. How he overcame it. He reframed failure as a learning experience, not a permanent defeat. He took small, calculated risks instead of avoiding business altogether. He sought mentorship and studied past mistakes to do better next time. 2. Shame and social embarrassment. The struggle, bankruptcy or a failed business can lead to a loss of status, embarrassment, and social withdrawal, especially if the entrepreneur was once seen as successful. Real example, Walt Disney. His first animation company, Laugh-O-Gram Studios, went bankrupt, and he was laughed at for failing. But he learned from it, moved to Hollywood, and created Disney Studios. Story, the man who hid from his friends. John owned a chain of restaurants, and for years, people admired him as a successful businessman. But when the 2008 financial crisis hit, his restaurants collapsed under debt. He had to declare bankruptcy, and suddenly, people who once respected him began to whisper behind his back. Ashamed, he cut off contact with friends and refused to show his face in public. But after attending a business recovery seminar, he realized that almost every great entrepreneur had failed at some point. With support, he started consulting for new restaurant owners, using his failures to help others avoid the same mistakes. How he overcame it. He reconnected with his community instead of isolating himself. He embraced vulnerability and shared his story to inspire others. He found new ways to add value through mentorship and consulting. 3. Depression and loss of self-worth. The struggle, many entrepreneurs tie their self-worth to their business success. When they fail, they don't just lose money, they lose their sense of identity and purpose. Real example, Elon Musk. After selling PayPal, Musk invested nearly all his money into Tesla and SpaceX. When both companies almost failed, he sank into deep stress and depression but kept pushing forward. Story, the CEO who thought he was a failure. Michael spent a decade building his online retail business, but after Amazon entered the market, his company couldn't compete. He had to lay off employees, close his business, and file for bankruptcy. He fell into deep depression, believing he was worthless without his business. It wasn't until a friend reminded him, "Your business failed, but you are not a failure," that he started to shift his perspective. He focused on rebuilding his confidence, took therapy, and eventually became a business coach, helping others navigate financial failure. How he overcame it. He separated his identity from his business success. He sought therapy and emotional support. He found a new purpose by teaching others. 4. Strained relationships and family stress. The struggle, business failure often leads to family stress, divorce, and relationship breakdowns, especially when financial hardship affects loved ones. Real example, Ray Kroc, McDonald's. Before McDonald's, Kroc faced multiple failed businesses that strained his marriage and led to divorce. Story, the marriage that almost fell apart. Sandra and Tom invested their life savings into a real estate business. When the market crashed, they lost everything. The financial stress led to constant arguments, blame, and emotional distance. Sandra almost filed for divorce, but instead, they started couples therapy and learned how to communicate through financial hardship. They set clearer financial plans for the future and started a new business together, this time with better risk management. How they overcame it.
Family Forum. For a new generation of people, learn smart ways to build individual and generational wealth, live and lead more purpose-driven lives, build and leverage community leadership, build strong personal and corporate brands, take personal and collective ownership of family life. Family Forum. For a new generation of families.
They prioritized open communication about money. They sought professional counseling instead of letting stress destroy their marriage. They created a financial safety net for the future to prevent extreme risk-taking. 5. Fear of trusting others again. The struggle. Many business failures happen due to bad partnerships, betrayals, or financial scams, making it hard for entrepreneurs to trust others again. Real example, Steve Jobs. He was fired from Apple, the company he co-founded, after internal conflicts. But instead of giving up, he launched Pixar and later returned to Apple stronger. Story, the betrayed business partner. Rachel co-founded a fashion startup with her best friend. But when the business faced financial trouble, her partner secretly withdrew all funds and left her in debt. Rachel was devastated not just financially, but emotionally. She spent years avoiding partnerships, believing that trusting people would lead to betrayal again. But after working with a business coach, she learned that not all partnerships fail, only the ones without clear legal and financial agreements. She started a new business, this time with legal protections in place, and found trustworthy partners who shared her vision. How she overcame it. She rebuilt trust through clear legal agreements and financial safeguards. She chose business partners carefully instead of avoiding collaboration. She used her past experience to educate others on business contracts. Final thought, from failure to success. Business failure and bankruptcy can be devastating, but they do not define you. Many of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, Walt Disney, Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, and Oprah Winfrey, have all experienced major financial setbacks. The key to overcoming business trauma is learning, adapting, and moving forward. Which story resonated with you the most? 4. Workplace and success trauma. Anxiety about career choices due to past failures or societal expectations. Pressure to succeed. Families who push unrealistic expectations for achievement. Fear of failure, trauma from past generations, losing jobs or failing in business. Toxic work culture, fear of authority, burnout, or exploitation due to past experiences. Traumas from the pressure to succeed. The pressure to succeed can manifest in many forms, from societal expectations to personal ambition. This pressure can lead to mental, emotional, and physical trauma. It can often feel like there's no room to fail, increasing stress and strain on a person's well-being. Here are 5 types of traumas that come from the pressure to succeed, along with real-life stories and how these individuals overcame them. 1. Anxiety and overwhelm from perfectionism. The struggle, people driven by the need to succeed may develop perfectionistic tendencies, leading to anxiety, burnout, and constant dissatisfaction with their achievements. Real example, Kendall Jenner, the model and reality TV star, has spoken publicly about her struggles with anxiety and the pressure to meet high expectations as a successful figure in the fashion industry. Story, the accountant who could never stop working. Alex worked as an accountant at a prestigious firm. He was ambitious, and his career was his life. However, his need to perfect every report, meet every deadline, and impress his bosses caused him constant anxiety. His stress escalated, and eventually, he started experiencing panic attacks during the workday. It wasn't until his wife sat him down, urging him to see a therapist, that Alex realized the pressure he put on himself was unsustainable. He learned that imperfection is part of progress, and striving for perfect results was actually holding him back. How he overcame it. He redefined his standards of success, aiming for excellence rather than perfection. He started practicing mindfulness and relaxation techniques to reduce anxiety. He prioritized self-compassion over self-criticism and learned to embrace mistakes as growth opportunities. 2. Loss of identity and self-worth. The struggle. When someone ties their self-worth to their success, they can lose their sense of identity if they don't achieve their goals or fail to live up to external expectations. Real example, Tiger Woods, the legendary golfer, faced a public and career crisis after his personal life unraveled, and many believed he could never return to his peak form. The pressure to be the best caused a deep identity crisis for Woods. Story, the artist who lost his passion. John was a well-known artist in his community, constantly praised for his innovative works. He felt immense pressure to outdo himself with each piece, striving to create something that would surpass his last success. When his latest exhibit received critical but not glowing reviews, John became consumed with self-doubt. He began questioning whether he was truly talented or just lucky. For months, John couldn't create anything new and felt emotionally empty. Finally, during a solo retreat to a quiet cabin, he realized that he had been identifying too strongly with his work. His worth wasn't tied to his success as an artist, but to his ability to express himself freely. How he overcame it. He separated his identity from his career success. He reconnected with his passion for art, without worrying about public approval. He focused on the process of creation, not the outcome, and began to enjoy painting again without the pressure of perfection. 3. Physical and emotional burnout. The struggle, the intense pressure to succeed often leads to burnout, where a person is physically, emotionally, and mentally drained. This can result in exhaustion, irritability, and even depression. Real example, Arianna Huffington. After collapsing from exhaustion due to her non-stop work schedule, the media mogul realized the need for balance and self-care. Her story is a well-known example of how the relentless pursuit of success can have severe consequences. Story, the startup founder who burned out. Sam had founded a successful tech startup that became a household name. He was proud of how much he had accomplished but was constantly working 80-hour weeks, missing sleep, and skipping meals. Despite the fame and recognition, Sam started feeling like he was running on empty. One day, after a major presentation, Sam found himself unable to focus or make simple decisions. He was mentally foggy and physically drained. This moment marked the beginning of a downward spiral into burnout. After taking a week off to recover, he realized how much his health had been neglected in the pursuit of success. How he overcame it. He delegated tasks and trusted his team to share the workload. He implemented a daily routine that included time for exercise, rest, and mindfulness. He learned to say no and prioritize quality over quantity in his work. 4. Fear of failure and perfection paralysis. The struggle, the pressure to succeed often comes with a crippling fear of failure, where the fear of not achieving something perfect prevents a person from taking action or trying new things. Real example, J.K. Rowling. Before the success of the Harry Potter series, Rowling was rejected by multiple publishers. Her fear of failure almost stopped her from pursuing her dreams, but her perseverance paid off. Story, the writer who almost gave up. Emily had always dreamed of writing a best-selling novel. She spent years working on her manuscript but was constantly paralyzed by the thought that it wasn't good enough. Every time she reread her work, she found flaws, which caused her to rewrite the entire book again and again. Her fear of failure kept her from submitting the manuscript to publishers, even though she had a promising story. Finally, after a friend encouraged her to submit her work, she received an offer from a publisher. Her first book became a bestseller, and Emily learned that perfection isn't a requirement for success. How she overcame it. She accepted that failure is part of the process and stopped aiming for perfection. She began sharing her work with others, seeking feedback instead of validation. She focused on progress, not perfection, and completed her novel rather than endlessly rewriting it. Strained relationships and isolation. The struggle, the overwhelming desire to succeed often leads to social isolation, as people focus all their energy on their goals at the expense of personal relationships. Real example, Steve Jobs, known for his obsessive drive to make Apple successful, Jobs' focus on work sometimes led to strained relationships with family and friends. Story, the CEO who lost touch with his family. James was a successful CEO of a growing company, constantly striving for higher profits and new innovations. As he worked longer hours and pushed his team harder, he noticed that his marriage was deteriorating, and he was missing important moments in his children's lives. His wife eventually confronted him about his workaholic tendencies, and he realized how isolated he had become. He took a step back from the daily grind and made a commitment to prioritize family time. This led to a more balanced approach to leadership, where he was able to succeed professionally without sacrificing personal relationships. How he overcame it. He set boundaries between work and personal life, ensuring he spent quality time with loved ones. He became more emotionally available, showing up for his family in ways he hadn't before. He learned that success without meaningful relationships wasn't truly success. Final thought, embracing balance over perfection. The pressure to succeed is a universal experience, but it doesn't have to come at the cost of your well-being. By recognizing the signs of trauma caused by this pressure, and by taking proactive steps to find balance, you can achieve success without compromising your health or happiness. Which story resonated with you the most? Trauma from the fear of failure. The fear of failure can be one of the most paralyzing experiences, creating internal barriers that hinder growth and success. This fear can lead to emotional and psychological trauma, manifesting in various forms of anxiety, self-doubt, and avoidance. Here are 5 types of traumas that stem from the fear of failure, accompanied by real-life stories of people who overcame these obstacles and thrived. 1. Paralyzing anxiety and self-doubt. The struggle, fear of failure often leads to chronic anxiety, where a person becomes so terrified of making mistakes that they freeze and fail to take action altogether. Self-doubt can also creep in, making it difficult to believe in one's abilities. Real example, Sylvester Stallone. Before becoming famous for Rocky, Stallone faced years of rejection in Hollywood and even struggled with extreme self-doubt. He was homeless at one point and believed that he would never succeed as an actor. Story, the athlete who couldn't compete. Lena was a talented swimmer throughout high school, but when it came time for competitive trials, she developed an overwhelming fear of failure. She would visualize every possible mistake she could make, and the stress would overwhelm her so much that she couldn't perform during races. Her fear of not winning and failing in front of others became a cycle she couldn't break. After years of anxiety, Lena sought the help of a sports psychologist, who taught her to focus on the process, not the outcome. Slowly, she learned to embrace mistakes as part of growth, rather than fearing them. How she overcame it. She practiced mindfulness techniques to manage anxiety. She reframed failure as feedback, not a catastrophe. She focused on small, incremental improvements, rather than the fear of losing. 2. Chronic procrastination and avoidance. The struggle, fear of failure often manifests as procrastination, putting off tasks because the thought of not doing them perfectly is terrifying. People may avoid taking action, which can lead to a lack of progress. Real example, Tim Ferriss. Before becoming a successful author and entrepreneur, Tim Ferriss struggled with chronic procrastination, fueled by his fear of failure. He was overwhelmed by the idea of making a mistake and constantly delayed starting projects. Story, the writer who couldn't finish his novel. David had always dreamed of writing a novel, but every time he sat down to write, he was paralyzed by the fear of failure. He worried that his writing wouldn't be good enough, so instead of writing, he'd spend hours researching or making excuses. His fear of imperfection kept him from completing a single draft for years. Eventually, David realized that his procrastination was a direct result of his fear of failure. With guidance from a mentor, he learned to embrace the idea of good enough and committed to writing without judging himself in the process. He finally finished his novel and later published it successfully. How he overcame it. He set small, manageable writing goals to overcome the paralysis of perfectionism. He reframed failure as part of the creative process rather than an obstacle. He committed to writing without self-judgment or fear of imperfection. 3. Avoiding challenges and missed opportunities. The struggle. People with a fear of failure tend to avoid challenges and risks, believing that the possibility of failure is too dangerous or painful. This avoidance results in missed opportunities for personal growth and achievement. Real example, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah faced numerous challenges and was even told she wasn't fit for TV in her early career. She could have avoided these challenges due to the fear of rejection, but she chose to take the risk and move forward despite the negative feedback. Story. The entrepreneur who refused to pivot. Sarah launched an online store for eco-friendly products, but it wasn't taking off. She was offered advice to pivot her business model, but the idea of failure was too much for her. Instead of adapting, Sarah held on to the original vision, afraid that changing would prove she had failed. After a year of stagnation, Sarah's business was on the brink of closing. It was only then that she realized her refusal to embrace failure prevented her from seeing the potential for growth in a new direction. She pivoted her business model, and within months, her store flourished. How she overcame it. She embraced failure as part of the entrepreneurial journey. She sought feedback and learned to pivot when necessary. She stopped fearing the unknown and started seeing challenges as opportunities. 4. Emotional and mental exhaustion. The struggle, the constant fear of failure can lead to mental exhaustion, where a person feels drained from trying to avoid failure at all costs. This exhaustion can make it difficult to focus or find motivation. Real example, Albert Einstein. Despite becoming one of the most brilliant minds in history, Einstein faced many failures and setbacks in his early career, which often left him emotionally drained and feeling mentally exhausted. Story. The lawyer who burned out. Mark had always been driven to succeed in his career as a lawyer. However, his constant fear of making mistakes in court drained him mentally. He would prepare for hours, but during the trial, he would second-guess every move, leading to exhaustion and anxiety. One day, he collapsed in his office from stress, unable to continue his work. After seeking therapy, he learned that his constant fear of failure was creating burnout. Mark learned to let go of perfectionism and delegate tasks to others, allowing him to recover and regain his energy. How he overcame it. He learned to delegate tasks and trust others with responsibilities. He practiced self-care routines to manage stress and prevent burnout. He reframed his fear of failure as a natural part of growth, not something to be avoided at all costs. 5. Impact on relationships and social isolation. The struggle, the fear of failure can cause people to withdraw socially and avoid relationships due to the fear of being judged for their shortcomings or failures. This isolation can deepen the emotional trauma. Real example, Bill Gates. Before Microsoft became the tech giant it is today, Bill Gates and his partner, Paul Allen, were rejected by multiple investors. Gates faced public scrutiny, and his fear of failure caused him to withdraw socially at times. Story. The artist who stopped showing her work. Maya was a talented visual artist, but her fear of failure prevented her from sharing her artwork with others. She believed that people would criticize her work, and the thought of being judged paralyzed her. She avoided showcasing her pieces at galleries, and soon, she became socially withdrawn. After years of avoiding exposure, Maya attended an art therapy workshop where she was encouraged to share her work without the fear of judgment. She began slowly opening up about her art and, eventually, exhibited her pieces. To her surprise, her work was well received, and the experience helped her reconnect with her creative passion. How she overcame it. She learned to embrace vulnerability by sharing her art with others. She reframed failure as growth, not judgment. She built supportive relationships with other artists who encouraged her progress. Final thought, embracing failure as growth. Fear of failure is one of the most common yet destructive forces in the journey to success. By recognizing the types of traumas it can cause, you can take the necessary steps to overcome these obstacles. Understanding that failure is a learning experience and part of the journey to growth can liberate you from the paralyzing effects of fear. Which of these stories spoke to you the most? Traumas from toxic work culture. A toxic work culture can cause lasting damage to an individual's mental, emotional, and physical well-being. It creates an environment where employees feel unsupported, undervalued, and overworked, which can lead to trauma that affects both their professional and personal lives. Here are 5 types of traumas that stem from toxic work cultures, with real stories and examples of how individuals overcame them. 1. Emotional burnout and exhaustion. The struggle. In toxic work environments, employees are often expected to work long hours with little recognition or time off, leading to emotional burnout. The constant stress can cause fatigue, lack of motivation, and feelings of being overwhelmed. Real example, Arianna Huffington. Arianna Huffington is known for publicly sharing her experience of burnout, which occurred after years of working relentlessly in the media industry. The constant pressure led to physical exhaustion, and she collapsed from overwork. Story: the overworked executive who hit a wall. James, a high-level executive at a marketing firm, was constantly being asked to work overtime to meet impossible deadlines. His bosses pressured him to produce more, and any mistake was met with harsh criticism. Over time, James felt emotionally drained, but he kept pushing forward, fearing that taking a break would show weakness. Eventually, James was so exhausted that he was unable to function at work, suffering from constant headaches and insomnia. After a serious health scare, he was forced to take a leave of absence. During this time, he realized that the toxic work culture was draining him, and he needed to make changes. How he overcame it. James took a step back from his demanding role and prioritized self-care. He set firm boundaries at work, ensuring that his health and well-being came first. James learned to communicate openly with his colleagues about the importance of work-life balance. 2. Decreased self-worth and imposter syndrome. The struggle. In toxic work environments, constant criticism, lack of appreciation, or micromanagement can lead to feelings of low self-worth and imposter syndrome. This results in employees doubting their abilities, even if they are skilled and capable. Real example, Sheryl Sandberg. In her book Lean In, Sandberg discusses how women, especially in male-dominated industries, face imposter syndrome. Despite being highly qualified, many women doubt their place at the table, a feeling exacerbated by toxic workplace environments. Story: the tech entrepreneur who felt invisible. Maya was a young entrepreneur in a competitive tech startup. She had excellent skills and a great track record, but her boss constantly belittled her contributions, favoring other team members over her. Over time, Maya began to doubt her abilities and questioned if she deserved to be part of the company. After a breakdown during a meeting, Maya realized that her lack of recognition was a reflection of the toxic culture around her, not a reflection of her capabilities. She began seeking mentorship from other women in tech and started attending leadership development workshops. How she overcame it. Maya focused on celebrating her achievements, no matter how small. She sought mentorship from strong leaders in her field who helped her rebuild her confidence. She recognized that her worth was not tied to the opinions of her toxic workplace. 3. Anxiety and fear of retaliation. The struggle. In toxic work cultures, employees often fear retaliation if they speak up about issues like harassment, unfair treatment, or unreasonable demands. This leads to chronic anxiety about job security and personal safety. Real example, Monica Lewinsky. Monica's experience in the White House and the aftermath was a highly publicized example of how toxic work cultures can breed anxiety and retaliation, especially when employees are blamed or shamed for things outside their control. Story: the teacher who dreaded speaking up. Rachel worked at a public high school where her principal had a reputation for unpredictable temper tantrums. Teachers were afraid to speak up about issues like student discipline or unfair evaluations, fearing retaliation in the form of extra workload or unfavorable treatment. Rachel was struggling with burnout and couldn't continue to teach effectively in such a toxic environment. After attending a teacher wellness seminar, she learned about her legal rights and how to safely speak out against workplace issues. How she overcame it. Rachel consulted with a union representative to understand her rights. She started documenting incidents of retaliation and unfair practices. Rachel learned to speak out confidently in a way that protected her job while advocating for change. 4. Social isolation and disconnection. The struggle. Toxic work environments can foster a sense of isolation. Employees may feel disconnected from colleagues, especially if there's a culture of competition over collaboration or cliques that exclude others. Real example, Steve Jobs. While Jobs was undeniably a visionary, his leadership style was often criticized for creating an isolating and toxic work culture at Apple, where employees felt pressure to compete rather than collaborate, leading to high turnover and employee dissatisfaction. Story, the designer who felt invisible. Claire worked at a top design agency where office politics and rivalries made it impossible to feel part of the team. No one would acknowledge her contributions, and the gossip and competitive behavior led her to feel disconnected from the work she loved. After talking to a former colleague, Claire realized that her value was being undermined by the toxic culture, not her work. She began reaching out to other departments and took the initiative to organize social events to rebuild connections with her colleagues. How she overcame it. Claire found ways to connect with others outside of her immediate team. She learned to set boundaries with toxic colleagues and avoid office drama. Claire developed strong professional relationships that empowered her to stand up against exclusion. 5. Loss of passion and motivation. The struggle. The constant negativity and lack of support in toxic work cultures can crush passion and motivation. Employees may start out excited about their work, only to become disillusioned and unenthusiastic due to the toxic environment. Real example, Howard Schultz, the Starbucks CEO, is known for advocating a positive company culture. However, even Schultz faced significant pressure to maintain that culture, especially during the company's early years, when the challenges of scaling globally created a difficult work environment for employees. Story, the writer who lost her spark. Lucy, a journalist, loved writing and had been passionate about storytelling. However, her news outlet was constantly focused on sensationalism and clickbait, with little regard for ethical reporting. Lucy became frustrated with the constant push for controversial stories, which felt like a betrayal of her values. She was on the verge of quitting when she realized that her passion for truth was still alive, but needed to be reignited. She took a short sabbatical and spent time volunteering for a nonprofit organization where she worked on a story that aligned with her values. How she overcame it. Lucy transitioned to freelance journalism, where she could choose stories that aligned with her values. She sought opportunities to work with organizations that supported ethical journalism. Lucy reignited her passion for writing by focusing on projects that brought her personal satisfaction. Final thought, breaking free from toxic work environments. A toxic work culture can have long-lasting effects, but it doesn't have to define your career or your life. By recognizing the signs of trauma, whether it's burnout, isolation, or a loss of motivation, and taking proactive steps to overcome them, you can regain control of your career and well-being. Have you ever experienced a toxic work culture? How did you cope or overcome it? Breaking generational fear and trauma. Healing requires self-awareness, therapy, and breaking toxic cycles. Key steps include recognizing the patterns, identifying inherited fears. Therapy and healing work, seeking professional guidance. Challenging beliefs, reframing mindsets and limiting beliefs. Creating new traditions, building healthier habits for future generations. Recognizing the patterns, break generational fear and trauma. Generational fear and trauma are deeply ingrained emotional and psychological patterns passed down through families or communities, often without awareness. These patterns can manifest in various ways, affecting how we interact, perceive ourselves, and make decisions in life. However, by recognizing these patterns and employing strategies to break them, individuals can pave the way for healing and growth. Here's how to recognize and break these patterns, along with real-life stories to illustrate each talking point. 1. Recognizing the cycle of fear, fear of poverty and scarcity. The pattern, one of the most common generational fears, stems from poverty or scarcity. Children who grow up in financially unstable environments often inherit the belief that there will never be enough, leading to anxiety around money, work, and success. Real example, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah was raised in poverty, often moving between homes in a cycle of instability. Despite becoming one of the wealthiest women in the world, Oprah has spoken about her fear of returning to poverty, a fear that still lingers with her, despite her success. Story: the family business struggling with scarcity. Sophie grew up in a family business that was always on the brink of bankruptcy. Her parents instilled in her the belief that money was always tight, and that failure was inevitable. As an adult, Sophie ran her own business, but she had a constant fear of running out of resources. She would overwork, not trusting her employees or delegating tasks, believing that if she didn't control everything, the business would collapse. When Sophie's therapist helped her identify this scarcity mindset, Sophie realized that it wasn't just her own fear, it was a pattern passed down from her parents, who had also grown up with financial insecurity. Sophie learned to shift her mindset by embracing abundance thinking, focusing on the potential for growth rather than fixating on the possibility of failure. Strategy to break the pattern. Sophie started budgeting and setting realistic financial goals to build financial security. She began to trust her team and delegate tasks to avoid burnout. Sophie practiced gratitude daily, focusing on the wealth of opportunities in her business rather than the fear of running out. 2. Breaking the cycle of emotional neglect. The pattern, generational trauma, often includes emotional neglect where feelings and emotional needs are ignored or dismissed. Children who grow up in such environments may carry forward feelings of being unloved or unimportant, which affect their adult relationships. Real example, Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga has spoken openly about the emotional neglect she experienced growing up, especially in her early years of pursuing fame. Her struggle with self-esteem and body image was rooted in feeling emotionally abandoned and unsupported by her family at critical moments in her life. Story: the silent daughter. Jasmine grew up in a household where her parents were emotionally distant and never expressed affection. As a result, Jasmine always felt like she wasn't good enough and that her needs were not valid. In adulthood, she struggled with relationships, often feeling misunderstood and neglected, even when her partner showed love and affection. Through therapy, Jasmine discovered that her fear of being rejected emotionally was rooted in her family's emotional neglect. She learned to communicate her feelings, express her needs, and set boundaries in her relationships. Strategy to break the pattern. Jasmine worked on self-compassion, learning to value her own emotions and needs.
Men's Forum wants you to master men's blueprint for life. Learn how to build wealth, build quality relationships with the right people, lead a better and healthier family life, live your full potential, inspire the world. Men were born to lead, keep, and protect the family. Join Men's Forum and master your blueprint for life. Men's Forum, all you need to become a better man.
She repaired relationships by communicating openly and vulnerably with loved ones. She embraced emotional independence, learning that her worth wasn't defined by others' affection. 3. Overcoming the fear of failure and rejection. The pattern, fear of failure and rejection, is a common generational trauma, particularly in families that value perfectionism or have experienced significant emotional or social rejection in the past. Real example, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest basketball player in history, was cut from his high school basketball team. This rejection could have led to a fear of failure, but instead, Jordan used it as fuel for his career. His mother instilled in him the belief that failure was an opportunity to learn and not something to fear. Story: the aspiring writer's fear. Liam always dreamed of writing a book, but his fear of rejection and failure kept him from even starting. Growing up, his father, an accomplished author, was highly critical, and every mistake Liam made was met with harsh criticism. As a result, Liam internalized the belief that failure was unacceptable, leading him to avoid pursuing his dreams altogether. Through therapy, Liam realized that his father's critical nature had shaped his fear of failure. He began to embrace mistakes as learning opportunities and started writing his first novel, regardless of the fear. Slowly, he built his confidence and published the book successfully. Strategy to break the pattern. Liam reframed failure as feedback, focusing on growth rather than perfection. He celebrated small wins and took the pressure off himself to be perfect. Liam built a support network of writers who encouraged each other, helping him feel less isolated. 4. Healing from intergenerational trauma of abuse and control. The pattern: families affected by abuse, physical, emotional, or psychological, may have a pattern of control, manipulation, or fear that gets passed down. Children of abusive parents often replicate those patterns in their relationships, perpetuating cycles of dominance or helplessness. Real example: Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry was raised in an abusive household, where his father was physically violent and his mother was emotionally neglected. Perry has discussed how he had to confront his generational trauma of abuse to break the cycle, especially when he became a parent. Story: The Controlling Parent. Elena grew up with a controlling mother who dictated every decision in her life, from who she could be friends with to what career path she should follow. As an adult, Elena found herself in relationships where she felt powerless or took on a submissive role, fearing rejection if she stood up for herself. When Elena realized she was replicating the trauma of control in her own life, she took steps to heal from the cycle. She began therapy to understand her need for approval and learned to assert her boundaries with both her mother and in romantic relationships. Strategy to break the pattern. Elena practiced setting healthy boundaries and saying no to emotional manipulation. She worked through her fear of confrontation and began speaking her truth with confidence. Elena learned to trust her own judgment and stop seeking approval from controlling figures. 5. Reversing the generational cycle of fear of success. The pattern: some families are afraid of success, either due to fear of jealousy, social ostracism, or the belief that success comes with a cost. This fear can be passed down, leading children to sabotage their own progress or avoid pursuing big goals. Real example: Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou overcame numerous barriers in her life, including an upbringing marked by trauma, and yet she became a globally respected author and poet. Angelou overcame a deep fear of public rejection and societal judgment, something that stemmed from her childhood experiences of being silenced and stigmatized. Story: The Family Heirloom of Fear. Carlos had a family tradition of avoiding the spotlight. His parents, despite being highly talented, never pursued their dreams because they were afraid of being judged or ostracized by others. Carlos inherited this fear and struggled to take leadership roles at work, even though he had the potential to be promoted. He found himself self-sabotaging opportunities for success. Through coaching, Carlos learned that his fear of success was rooted in his family's history of social isolation. By examining this pattern and understanding it, Carlos made a conscious decision to embrace success. He began taking on leadership roles and slowly overcame his fear of standing out. Strategy to break the pattern. Carlos set small, achievable goals to build confidence and experience success. He learned to celebrate his wins, regardless of others' opinions. Carlos shifted his focus from fearing rejection to focusing on his potential impact. Final thought: healing generational trauma is possible. Generational trauma doesn't have to define you or your future. By recognizing the patterns and taking steps to break them, whether through therapy, education, or self-reflection, you can free yourself from the burdens passed down to you. Healing requires patience, self-compassion, and a commitment to change. Have you noticed any of these patterns in your own family or life? What steps can you take today to start breaking the cycle? Therapy and healing work strategies to break generational fear and trauma. Healing generational trauma involves breaking cycles of fear, pain, and dysfunction that have been passed down through family lines. Therapy and healing work offers a structured approach to not only recognize these traumas but also to actively transform them. Here are effective therapy and healing strategies to break generational fear and trauma, with real-life examples and stories to illustrate each one. 1. Family systems therapy: recognizing and shifting the family dynamics. The strategy: family systems therapy is a therapeutic approach that helps individuals understand how they fit into the larger family dynamic. It looks at how generational patterns, like fear and trauma, are passed down through family systems. By understanding these dynamics, individuals can begin to break the cycle and foster healthier relationships. Real example: Terry Real. Therapist Terry Real often works with couples and families to identify dysfunctional patterns that perpetuate generational trauma. In his book The New Rules of Marriage, Reel discusses how family dynamics can influence relationships and how identifying these patterns helps in healing and breaking the cycle. Story: The cycle of divorce in a family. Karen grew up in a family where divorce was a common theme. Both of her parents had been through multiple marriages, and each time, the relationships ended in bitterness and conflict. As an adult, Karen was deeply afraid of commitment, believing that all relationships were doomed to fail. She had already been through one failed marriage and was about to give up on love entirely. When Karen sought therapy, she participated in family systems therapy, where she learned that her fears of relationships were rooted in her parents' unresolved conflicts. The therapist helped her trace her own feelings of abandonment and rejection to patterns from her childhood and early relationships. How she healed. Karen learned to recognize her family's dysfunctional patterns and how they affected her choices. She began setting healthier boundaries and learned to communicate more effectively in her relationships. Through self-awareness and understanding, Karen broke the cycle and entered a more fulfilling, stable relationship. 2. Cognitive behavioral therapy, changing negative thought patterns. The strategy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, helps individuals identify and challenge negative thought patterns that stem from generational fear and trauma. These cognitive distortions often perpetuate cycles of anxiety, depression, and self-sabotage. Real example: David Burns, a pioneer in CBT, has helped thousands of individuals overcome mental health challenges by focusing on identifying and changing harmful thoughts. In his book Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, Burns offers practical tools to rewrite negative thoughts and break the cycle of fear and self-doubt. Story: The fear of financial failure. Luis grew up with parents who struggled financially. His father had experienced several failed businesses, and his mother often spoke about how they would never have enough money. As an adult, Luis had a thriving career but feared financial ruin constantly, despite earning a decent salary. He often made financial decisions out of anxiety rather than logic, leading to constant stress about money. In therapy, Luis worked with a CBT therapist who helped him recognize that his fears of financial failure were exaggerated and rooted in his parents' experiences. The therapist taught him how to challenge his thoughts by asking, "Is this fear based on evidence, or is it a learned pattern from my childhood?" How he healed. Luis learned to question the fear-based thoughts that led him to self-sabotage. He created a realistic financial plan, focusing on practical steps rather than emotional responses. Luis practiced mindfulness to stay grounded and focus on what he could control, rather than worry about things out of his hands. 3. Trauma-informed therapy, addressing the roots of trauma. The strategy, trauma-informed therapy, focuses on the impact of trauma on a person's life, addressing the root causes of generational fear and pain. This approach is based on the understanding that trauma can change the way people view the world, themselves, and others, and it works to help people process and heal from these deep wounds. Real example: Bessel van der Kolk, a renowned trauma expert. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's book The Body Keeps the Score explores how trauma is stored in the body and its effects on both mental and physical health. He emphasizes that recognizing the impact of trauma is key to healing. Story: The long-term effects of childhood abuse. Natalie grew up in an abusive household where both physical and emotional abuse were common. She left home at 18, but the trauma lingered for years, affecting her ability to trust others, feel safe in her relationships, and even succeed at work. Despite her best efforts, Natalie kept falling into toxic relationships, which mirrored the abuse she had suffered as a child. When she began trauma-informed therapy, Natalie learned about how unresolved trauma from her childhood was affecting her adult life. The therapist helped her process these painful experiences and recognize how her body had stored the trauma in the form of anxiety, fear, and tension. How she healed. Natalie learned grounding techniques to help her manage physical reactions to trauma. She was taught to reframe her beliefs around relationships, recognizing that not all relationships were abusive. With time, Natalie worked through the trauma, learning to trust herself and others, and build healthier, supportive connections. For narrative therapy, rewriting the story of your life. The strategy, narrative therapy, helps individuals reframe their life story and recognize how past traumas have influenced their sense of identity. By reframing the narrative, individuals can create new stories that are empowering and reflect their true potential, rather than being trapped by past trauma. Real example, Michael White, the creator of narrative therapy. Michael White emphasized how individuals can separate themselves from their problems by externalizing them. In his work, he showed how people could rewrite their stories to move from victimhood to empowerment. Story: The Legacy of Emotional Abuse. Amina had always seen herself as a failure, a perception that was passed down from her mother, who was emotionally abusive and frequently told Amina she would never amount to anything. In her 20s, Amina found herself in a dead-end job and a series of dysfunctional relationships, continuing the story of worthlessness that she inherited from her mother. Amina decided to try narrative therapy to change her story. In therapy, she learned to separate herself from the toxic narrative that her mother had imposed on her. The therapist encouraged Amina to write out her story, not as a tale of failure, but as a story of resilience, strength, and growth. How she healed. Amina identified key moments in her life where she had made courageous decisions, despite the negativity around her. She began to redefine her self-worth, seeing herself not as a victim but as a survivor. Amina created a new narrative for herself, one that centered on her growth and empowerment. 5. Mindfulness and somatic healing, healing the body-mind connection. The strategy, mindfulness and somatic healing, work on the body-mind connection, helping individuals release the physical manifestations of trauma. By focusing on the present moment and engaging in body-based practices, individuals can learn to process trauma that is held in the body and reduce its impact on their mental health. Real example, Dr. Gabor Mate's work on addiction and trauma emphasizes the role of the body in holding on to trauma. In his book When the Body Says No, Mate discusses how the body keeps score of trauma and how healing through mindfulness and somatic therapies can help release that stored trauma. Story: The woman who carried her pain in her body. Isabella had suffered from chronic back pain for years. Despite numerous visits to doctors and physical therapists, no one could explain why her pain persisted. It wasn't until she began working with a somatic therapist that she realized her back pain was a physical manifestation of emotional trauma from her childhood. Her father had been emotionally absent, and she had internalized his neglect. In somatic therapy, Isabella was guided to tune into the sensations in her body, allowing herself to feel the emotions that were connected to her pain. Slowly, she began to release these feelings through breath work, movement, and mindfulness practices. How she healed. Isabella learned to listen to her body and acknowledge the emotional pain that had been stored there. She practiced mindful movement and body awareness to help release physical tension and emotional trauma. Isabella's chronic pain decreased as she continued to process and release the emotional trauma stored in her body. Final thoughts: breaking the cycle of generational trauma. Healing from generational trauma requires deep self-awareness and a commitment to breaking harmful cycles. Through therapy, mindfulness, and personal reflection, individuals can rewrite their stories, heal old wounds, and create healthier futures for themselves and future generations. It's not an easy journey, but with the right strategies, transformation is not only possible, it's deeply rewarding. What patterns of generational trauma have you noticed in your own life? How do you plan to break them? Overcome limiting beliefs to break generational fear and trauma. Limiting beliefs are deeply ingrained thought patterns that hold individuals back from realizing their full potential. These beliefs are often passed down through generations and can significantly affect a person's self-worth, decision-making, and overall well-being. Overcoming these limiting beliefs is essential for breaking generational fear and trauma. Here are effective strategies to overcome limiting beliefs, with real-life examples and stories illustrating each approach. 1. Identify and challenge negative core beliefs. The strategy: the first step in overcoming limiting beliefs is to identify them. These beliefs are often so deeply ingrained that they may feel like truths, but they are often based on past trauma or negative family messages. Once identified, individuals can challenge these beliefs by questioning their validity and replacing them with more empowering alternatives. Real example: Byron Katie. In her work, Byron Katie developed a process called the work, which involves identifying and questioning limiting beliefs. Her book Loving What Is illustrates how challenging thoughts like, I am not good enough, or, I will always fail, can free people from the grip of limiting beliefs. Story: Breaking the Belief of Unworthiness. Maria grew up in a family where her mother constantly told her, "You're not as good as others," and, "You'll never amount to anything." This belief stuck with Maria well into adulthood, affecting her career and relationships. She avoided taking on leadership roles at work because she didn't think she was qualified, and she hesitated to pursue relationships for fear of rejection. When Maria began therapy, she learned to identify this deeply rooted belief of unworthiness. The therapist helped her challenge the idea by asking, "Is there any evidence to support this belief, and how does this belief serve you?" Maria realized that her belief was based on her mother's criticism, not her actual abilities. How she healed. Maria started to reframe her thoughts, replacing, "I am not good enough," with, "I am capable and deserving of success." She took small risks at work, gradually taking on more responsibilities and receiving positive feedback. With practice, Maria's self-esteem grew, and she no longer let her old belief dictate her choices. 2. Rewriting the narrative of your life. The strategy: narrative reframing is a powerful strategy to overcome limiting beliefs. This involves rewriting the story you've been telling yourself about who you are, based on past experiences. By taking control of your narrative, you can turn your experiences of fear, trauma, and self-doubt into stories of resilience, growth, and empowerment. Real example: Michael White. A key figure in narrative therapy, Michael White believed that people could break free from their limiting beliefs by externalizing their problems and creating new, empowering narratives. His method helps people separate themselves from their problems and rewrite their life stories from a position of strength. Story: Overcoming the Fear of Poverty. Jonah grew up in a family where money was a constant source of stress. His father often said, "Money doesn't grow on trees," and, "We'll never be rich." This narrative of financial struggle stuck with Jonah into adulthood. He avoided investing, and even when he had a steady job, he constantly worried about running out of money. In therapy, Jonah was encouraged to rewrite his financial narrative. Instead of seeing money as a scarce resource that he would never have enough of, he began to see it as a tool to create security and opportunities. He wrote down a new story about his finances, one where he was financially savvy and responsible, actively making smart investments. How he healed. Jonah began creating a budget, setting clear financial goals, and saving with intention. He sought advice from financial experts to empower his decision-making. Jonah's new financial narrative gave him the confidence to invest, which eventually led to increased wealth and financial stability. 3. Practice affirmations and positive self-talk. The strategy: affirmations and positive self-talk are key strategies for breaking through limiting beliefs. Repeating positive affirmations daily helps rewire the brain, replacing old, harmful beliefs with empowering, supportive ones. This technique encourages self-compassion and boosts confidence. Real example: Louise Hay. In her book, You Can Heal Your Life, Louise Hay teaches that affirmations are a powerful tool for healing and transforming limiting beliefs. She emphasizes how using positive affirmations can help individuals heal from trauma, release guilt, and change negative patterns. Story: Overcoming the belief of not being enough. Sophia had always struggled with the belief that she wasn't worthy of success. Her parents had repeatedly told her, "You'll never be as good as your older sibling," which created a constant feeling of inadequacy. When Sophia entered the workforce, she constantly compared herself to others and felt like she didn't measure up. After starting therapy, her therapist introduced her to affirmations. Sophia began to repeat phrases like, "I am enough," "I am worthy of success," and "I deserve good things." It felt awkward at first, but gradually, these affirmations began to shift her internal dialogue. How she healed. Sophia created a daily ritual of repeating her affirmations in the mirror each morning. She celebrated her small achievements, reinforcing her new belief system. Over time, Sophia started to embrace her value and potential, achieving a promotion at work and fostering healthier relationships. 4. Cultivate self-compassion and forgiveness. The strategy, self-compassion and forgiveness are essential for breaking the hold of generational trauma and limiting beliefs. Holding on to self-blame, guilt, or anger keeps individuals trapped in negative cycles. By practicing self-compassion and forgiving themselves and others, individuals can let go of the emotional weight and begin healing. Real example, Couldnt, a researcher and psychologist. Couldnt has written extensively about the importance of self-compassion in healing trauma. In her book Self-Compassion, Neff outlines how people can learn to treat themselves with kindness, recognizing their shared humanity and letting go of judgment and shame. Story, letting go of the fear of abandonment. Emma had grown up in a household where her parents frequently fought, and her father eventually left the family when she was a teenager. Emma internalized the belief that she was unworthy of love and would eventually be abandoned, just like her father had abandoned her family. When Emma began therapy, she learned about the power of self-compassion. She started to forgive herself for the pain she had carried for years and accepted that her father's abandonment was not a reflection of her worth. By practicing compassion for herself, she was able to release the trauma of abandonment and begin healing. How she healed. Emma wrote a letter of forgiveness to her father, not to absolve him, but to release herself from carrying the burden of anger and abandonment. She practiced self-compassion by treating herself with kindness and being less critical of her mistakes. Over time, Emma began to form healthier relationships and saw herself as someone deserving of love. 5. Seek support and build empowering relationships. The strategy, breaking limiting beliefs, often requires support from others. Seeking guidance from mentors, coaches, or supportive peers can help individuals see beyond their limiting beliefs and gain confidence. Surrounding oneself with empowering, positive relationships reinforces healthy beliefs and creates a supportive community for healing. Real example, Tony Robbins, a life coach and motivational speaker. Tony Robbins often speaks about the power of surrounding oneself with positive, like-minded people. In his programs, he emphasizes the importance of creating a tribe of individuals who uplift and challenge you to reach your full potential. Story, the power of community in overcoming fear of failure. Jack had always believed that failure was unacceptable. He had been raised in a family where perfection was demanded, and failure was seen as shameful. This fear of failure paralyzed him in both his personal and professional life. He was afraid to take risks or pursue new opportunities because he feared he would disappoint those around him. Jack decided to join a self-development group that focused on personal growth and business success. In this group, he met individuals who encouraged him to reframe failure as a learning experience, not a catastrophe. The group shared their own stories of failure and success, which helped Jack realize that failure was part of the journey. How he healed. Jack began to take calculated risks, knowing that failure was not a reflection of his worth. He sought feedback and support from his new empowering community to help him grow. With time, Jack stopped fearing failure and started embracing it as an essential part of success. Conclusion: overcoming limiting beliefs and breaking generational trauma. Overcoming limiting beliefs is a powerful strategy for breaking free from the chains of generational fear and trauma. By identifying and challenging negative beliefs, rewriting our narratives, practicing self-compassion, and seeking support, we can heal from the wounds of the past and create a new, empowered future for ourselves and future generations. Creating new traditions. Strategies to create new traditions and break generational fear and traumas. Creating new traditions is a powerful way to break free from the cycles of generational fear and trauma. By consciously designing healthier, more empowering rituals and practices, individuals can reshape their family dynamics and create legacies of healing, resilience, and empowerment. Below are some strategies to create new traditions, with real-life examples and stories for each talking point. 1. Develop family rituals of connection and communication. The strategy: family rituals that emphasize open communication, connection, and emotional support can help break patterns of silence, neglect, or disconnection that have often been passed down through generations. These rituals foster healthy relationships and create a space where family members feel safe and understood. Real example: The Gottman Institute is well known for its research on healthy relationships. Doctors John and Julie Schwartz Gottman have highlighted how small, consistent rituals of connection, such as regular family meetings or rituals of connection, strengthen family bonds and create a foundation of trust and communication. Story: Rebuilding connection after generational silence. Marcus grew up in a family where communication was limited. His parents never openly discussed emotions, and he often felt isolated, even within his own home. As an adult, Marcus recognized that this lack of communication contributed to his feelings of loneliness and emotional disconnection in his relationships. Determined to create a different experience for his own family, Marcus started a weekly family circle where everyone gathered to share their thoughts and feelings. No one was allowed to interrupt, and everyone had an equal opportunity to speak. His children, initially shy, soon opened up, sharing their school experiences and expressing emotions they had kept hidden. How he healed. Marcus created a safe space for his family to communicate openly, which strengthened their bond and helped them process emotions together. By modeling emotional transparency, he was able to teach his children how to communicate and resolve conflicts in healthier ways. The family circle became a cherished tradition that replaced the silence that once dominated Marcus's family history. To cultivate practices of forgiveness and compassion. The strategy: one of the most powerful ways to break generational trauma is to create rituals of forgiveness. This can involve family members coming together to acknowledge past hurts, forgive each other, and commit to moving forward with compassion. Creating a tradition of forgiveness helps release the emotional burden of past wrongs and fosters a healing environment. Real example: Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Desmond Tutu's work in South Africa emphasizes the importance of forgiveness in healing collective trauma. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission encouraged victims and perpetrators of apartheid-era violence to come together, share their stories, and, in many cases, offer forgiveness. Story: Healing generational wounds through forgiveness. Lena came from a family with a long history of unresolved conflict and resentment. Her grandparents never forgave each other for past betrayals, and this bitterness was passed down to her parents, who carried the same grudges. As Lena grew up, she felt the weight of these generational grievances. When Lena became a mother, she decided to break the cycle of anger and resentment. She initiated a family forgiveness ritual on New Year's Eve. Each family member was encouraged to write a letter expressing their forgiveness for any past hurts, whether large or small. They would read the letters aloud and share their feelings. At first, the process was difficult. But as the ritual continued, it became easier for Lena's family to release old grudges and make peace with each other. How she healed. Lena created a healing space where family members could release old wounds and practice empathy. This tradition of forgiveness became a symbol of emotional freedom, where the past was no longer allowed to control the present. Over time, Lena's family embraced forgiveness as a regular tradition, which fostered a culture of emotional healing for future generations. 3. Reclaim and redefine cultural heritage and traditions. The strategy: sometimes, generational trauma stems from the loss of cultural heritage or the erasure of meaningful traditions. By reconnecting with and redefining one's cultural roots, individuals can honor their ancestry and create new traditions that celebrate their identity and resilience. Real example: the Black Panther Party's cultural programs during the Civil Rights Movement. The Black Panther Party created cultural programs that reclaimed African heritage, celebrated Black history, and empowered the community. This effort helped redefine identity and create new traditions of pride and solidarity in response to systemic oppression. Story: Reclaiming identity and heritage. Rosa grew up in a family that distanced themselves from their cultural roots in an effort to assimilate into mainstream society. Her parents, who had immigrated from Mexico, discouraged her from speaking Spanish, fearing that it would hinder her success. This led to a sense of disconnection from her heritage, and Rosa struggled with shame about her cultural identity. As an adult, Rosa realized that this shame was a form of generational trauma, and she sought to reclaim her cultural identity. She began a tradition of celebrating Mexican holidays like Dia de los Muertos with her own children, teaching them about the significance of the celebrations and their heritage. Rosa also learned to speak Spanish fluently and passed it down to her children. How she healed. Rosa and her children embraced their cultural heritage with pride, helping to break the cycle of assimilation that had caused shame in her family. She used cultural traditions to create a strong sense of identity for her family, showing them the value of honoring their ancestors. Over time, Rosa's family felt a deeper connection to their roots and became empowered by their shared cultural history. 4. Establish healthy boundaries and self-care rituals. The strategy, a significant part of breaking generational trauma, is learning how to set healthy boundaries. By creating self-care rituals, individuals can protect their emotional well-being, ensure their needs are met, and stop the cycle of emotional neglect or abuse that may have been passed down. Real example: Brené Brown's work on vulnerability and boundaries. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability emphasizes the importance of setting boundaries and engaging in self-care practices to build resilience. She encourages people to recognize when they are overextended and to say no in order to protect their mental and emotional health. Story: establishing boundaries to break the cycle of overwork. David grew up in a family where the work ethic was worshipped. His father always said, "Hard work is the key to success," and it was common for family members to sacrifice their personal needs for the sake of the job. David internalized this belief and often worked late into the night, ignoring his own physical and emotional needs. When David got married and became a father, he realized that his tendency to overwork was harming his family life. He was exhausted and emotionally distant from his spouse and children. He decided to break the cycle by creating a self-care tradition. Every Sunday evening, he and his family would have a rest and reset night. No work allowed, just relaxation, family bonding, and self-care practices like meditation or reading. How he healed. David set clear boundaries around his work schedule, making time for family and self-care every week. He modeled for his children the importance of taking care of oneself and respecting personal boundaries. This tradition gave David the space he needed to recharge and connect with his family, which led to a more balanced and fulfilling life. 5. Focus on empowering future generations with positive stories. The strategy: one of the most impactful ways to create new traditions is to focus on empowering future generations through the stories and values you pass down. Instead of passing on the story of fear, scarcity, or trauma, create a legacy of empowerment, hope, and resilience. Real example: the Legacy Project by Dave Isai. Dave Isai's StoryCorps project encourages people to record and share their life stories, focusing on positive moments, lessons, and resilience. By sharing empowering stories, families can pass on messages of strength, love, and hope. Story: empowering children with stories of overcoming adversity. Ellen came from a family marked by poverty and hardship. Her parents struggled to make ends meet, and her grandparents faced racism and discrimination. These stories of hardship and trauma shaped Ellen's worldview, and she feared that the cycle of struggle would continue for her children. However, Ellen was determined to break the cycle of despair. She began to share with her children the stories of resilience in her family, focusing on moments where people overcame adversity. She also began to tell them stories of her accomplishments, showing them that they could achieve success despite challenges. How she healed. Ellen created a tradition of telling empowering family stories during dinner each week, emphasizing overcoming adversity and the importance of perseverance. She shared not just the struggles, but the lessons learned and the triumphs, creating a more hopeful narrative for her children. Her children grew up feeling empowered and confident, knowing they could create a legacy of success and resilience. Conclusion: creating new traditions to break generational trauma. Breaking generational fear and trauma requires intentional effort to create new traditions that promote connection, healing, and empowerment. By developing family rituals of communication, cultivating forgiveness, reclaiming cultural heritage, establishing boundaries, and sharing empowering stories, individuals can heal from the past and create a positive legacy for future generations.
Family Forum. For a new generation of people, learn smart ways to build individual and generational wealth. Live and lead more purpose-driven lives. Build and leverage community leadership. Build strong personal and corporate brands. Take personal and collective ownership of family life. Family Forum for a new generation of families.